They don't tell you about the dreams when they hand you the keys to a listening station. They tell you about signal protocols, about frequency allocations, about the 27 different ways you can accidentally violate international broadcasting treaties. They give you manuals thick as phone books and clearance badges that weigh heavy in your pocket. But nobody mentions the dreams. I was 23 when I got assigned to Station Echo 7, a signals intelligence facility buried in the Cascade Mountains, 200 miles from anything you'd call civilization. The official designation was Atmospheric Research and Communications Monitoring. The real job was simpler. We listened to everything. Every radio wave, every stray transmission, every whisper of electromagnetic noise that passed through our sector of sky. We cataloged it, archived it, and reported anything unusual up the chain. The station had been there since 1952, and in 70 years, nobody had ever completed a full tour without requesting early transfer. The facility sat in a valley so narrow the sun only hit it directly for 3 hours a day. Concrete bunkers built into the mountainside, connected by tunnels that always smelled like cold metal and old coffee. My shift was midnight to 8 a.m., the graveyard watch, when the ionosphere does strange things and signals bounce across the planet in ways that daylight scrambles. My supervisor was a woman named Caroline Vess. She'd been at Echo 7 for 11 years, which made her either dedicated or damaged. Her face had the texture of someone who'd spent too long staring at oscilloscopes in the dark. When she handed me my station assignment, she kept her voice flat and professional. "You'll monitor banks 4 through 9, she said, pointing to a row of receivers. Civilian broadcasts, amateur radio, some military overflow, standard sweep protocol. If you pick up anything on the restricted list, you flag it immediately and don't listen further." I nodded, familiar with the routine. Every listening post has restricted frequencies, foreign military, encrypted government channels, things you're not cleared to intercept even if you can technically receive them. Then she added something that wasn't in any manual. If you hear transmissions on 4.625 MHz between 0300 and 0400 hours, log it as atmospheric interference and move to the next frequency. Do not attempt to decode. Do not record beyond the automatic archive. Do not discuss the content of transmissions on 4.625 MHz with anyone outside this facility. The last rule was underlined twice. Rules like these exist because someone before you didn't follow them. I asked what happened to the last tech on my shift. Caroline didn't answer right away. She adjusted the gain on one of the receivers, checked the frequency counter, then said quietly, "He followed a set of coordinates he dreamed about, found himself standing in a field 2 states away with no memory of driving there. The coordinates were real. He'd never been to that location in his life." How did he know the coordinates from his dream? Because he woke up and they were written in his logbook, in his own handwriting, during a shift he didn't remember working. She walked me through the rest of the setup: spectrum analyzers, the automatic recording system, the encryption on our outbound reports. The equipment was a mix of Cold War relics and modern digital receivers. The old Collins tube radio sat alongside software-defined setups, all feeding into a central logging system that time-stamped every signal we monitored. A listening station is a machine for turning invisible waves into evidence. The problem is when the evidence doesn't want to be found. The first week was unremarkable. I learned the rhythm of the graveyard shift, the distant hum of commercial AM stations fading in and out as the ionosphere shifted, the regular check-ins from military aircraft, the amateur radio operators in Asia coming through with that peculiar clarity you only get at night when the D layer of the ionosphere dissolves and signals skip halfway around the world. Radio propagation is a science, but it has moods. The atmosphere is a three-dimensional ocean of charged particles, and radio waves bend through it like light through water. At night, when solar radiation isn't ionizing the lower atmosphere, signals can bounce between the ground and the ionosphere for thousands of miles. That's why you can hear a station from Japan on a receiver in Oregon at 2 a.m., but not at 2 p.m. The same physics that lets you hear distant music also makes the spectrum crowded with ghosts, reflections, echoes, signals that shouldn't be there, but are.
When you listen to the spectrum long enough, you start to hear things that aren't quite signals and aren't quite silence. The first time I tuned across 4.625 megahertz was accidental. It was my fourth night, around 0230 hours. I was doing a routine sweep through the shortwave bands, listening for any anomalous activity, when my receiver's tuning knob stuck slightly. The digital frequency counter rolled past 4.625, and I heard it, just for a second. A voice, speaking backwards. Not a recording played in reverse. This was someone speaking with reversed phonemes, the way your vocal cords would have to move if language worked in the opposite direction. The syllables had the rhythm of speech, but the wrongness of a sound that doesn't belong to any human throat. I jerked the tuning knob away from the frequency so fast I nearly knocked the coffee cup off my desk. My hands were shaking. I checked the atomic clock on the wall. 0247 hours. Still 13 minutes before the restricted window began. The frequency didn't wait for the rules. The rules waited for the frequency. I didn't log it. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, tuning drift at 0247, corrected. Nothing about what I'd heard. Nothing about how my skin felt cold in a room that was temperature controlled to exactly 68 degrees. That night, I dreamed about a forest. Not unusual. I'd grown up near woods. But in the dream, someone was speaking to me in that same reversed voice, telling me coordinates. I woke up at 0900, wrote the coordinates down reflexively while still half asleep. 45.8234 degrees north, 121.7278 degrees west. Then I remembered Caroline's rule. If coordinates appear in your notes without conscious memory of writing them, destroy the page immediately. I held the paper for a long time. The coordinates meant nothing to me, could be anywhere in the Pacific Northwest. I should have burned it. Instead, I folded it and put it in my wallet. Curiosity in a listening station is a controlled substance. Small doses are encouraged. Overdose is career-ending. The second incident happened 6 nights later. I'd managed to avoid 4.625 megahertz completely, keeping my sweeps deliberately wide of that part of the spectrum. But at 3:17 hours, one of the automated receivers locked onto the frequency by itself. I wasn't even at that station. I was across the room checking a different band when I heard the speaker crackle to life. That backwards voice again, but this time I could hear something underneath it, like carrier wave modulation, the kind of pattern you get when data is being transmitted using audio tones. The receiver's S-meter was pegged, full signal strength, which was impossible because there's no licensed transmitter on 4.625 megahertz within 1,000 miles of our location. The frequency falls in a gap between commercial broadcasting and amateur bands, a quiet zone used mostly for noise measurements and propagation studies. Signals don't appear from nowhere. Physics doesn't allow it, but bureaucracy does. I watched the receiver for exactly 30 seconds, following protocol. The audio output was being recorded automatically, tagged with timestamp and frequency. When I moved to switch it off, something stopped me. On the oscilloscope next to the receiver, the waveform wasn't random. It was structured. repeating patterns every 17 seconds like a digital encoding scheme. Not any standard mode I recognized, not FSK, not PSK, not any of the common data transmission protocols, but definitely artificial. I hit the emergency log button. In situations like this, protocol says you mark it for analysis and move on. Let the day shift figure it out. But I also grabbed a notepad and started writing down the pattern I was seeing. Short, long, short, pause, long, long, short, pause, repeating. When I stopped writing and looked down, I'd filled half a page with coordinates, different ones this time, 7 sets. The signal wasn't transmitting coordinates, it was making me write them. I reported it to Caroline when she came in at 0800. She read my log entry, looked at the notepad, and her face went the color of old paper. "You wrote these down during the transmission?" I thought I was transcribing the pattern, but when I looked, "Destroy the page right now." I hesitated. "Don't we need to?" "Marcus," her voice was sharp enough to cut. "How many coordinates?" 7. She pulled a folder from a locked drawer. Inside were incident reports dating back to 1979. Each one described the same thing. Techs hearing the signal, writing down coordinates unconsciously, experiencing vivid dreams. The number of coordinates varied, but there was a note in red ink at the bottom of each report. All personnel who verified coordinate accuracy experienced level 3 cognitive dissociation within 72 hours. "What's level 3 cognitive dissociation?" She said. "It means they drove to the locations, followed the coordinates like a compulsion. Some of them we found, some of them we didn't." She took my notepad from my hand and fed it into the paper shredder beside her desk. "You don't verify, you don't investigate, you forget." Some answers are more dangerous than questions. But forgetting isn't a decision you can make for your subconscious. That night, my night off, I dreamed about all 7 locations. I saw them in first-person perspective: an abandoned grain silo in Montana, a hiking trail in the Cascades, a parking lot behind a closed shopping mall, a stretch of desert in eastern Oregon, a boat dock on a reservoir, a radio tower outside Spokane, and a basement in a house I'd never seen. In the dream, I was standing in each location, and the backwards voice was there, clearer than it had ever been through the speakers. And then for just a second in each location, the voice resolved into forward speech. "You are the receiver now." I woke up at 3 a.m. exactly. The atomic clock I kept by my bed read 3:00:00, and I realized I'd been lying there with my eyes open for an unknown amount of time. My notebook was on the nightstand, open, with all 7 coordinates written in my handwriting. The transmission doesn't need a radio, it just needs a frequency, and your brain operates on frequencies too. I didn't go to medical. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I started researching. Not the coordinates themselves, I wasn't that far gone, but the history of 4.625 megahertz.
The station library was small, mostly technical manuals and propagation charts, but there were archived reports dating back to the facility's opening in 1952. I found references to the frequency scattered through decades of incident logs, always with the same bureaucratic language: anomalous propagation, unidentified interference, recommended monitoring restriction. But in a report from 1967, someone had been more specific. A technician named Donald Richter had written, "Transmission source cannot be triangulated despite multiple attempts using direction-finding equipment. Signal appears to originate from ionospheric reflection, but reflection angle suggests impossible ground-based transmitter location. Calculated position 2,400 meters below sea level, Pacific Ocean.
Recommend frequency be designated restricted pending further investigation. Further investigation never happened, or if it did, it wasn't in any file I could access. Government files have black holes. Things fall into them, and the paperwork seals over like scar tissue. I found Richter's name in another document, a personnel transfer notice from 1968. He'd requested immediate reassignment to a desk job in Virginia. The request was approved with unusual speed. There was a handwritten note in the margin. Medical evaluation, severe insomnia, paranoid fixation on coordinate systems. Recommend psychiatric observation. The next night at work, I couldn't help myself. At exactly 0300, I tuned receiver 6 to 4.625 megahertz and waited. The voice came through at 0303, clearer than before. The backward speech resolved into something almost linguistic, and I realized I was starting to understand it, not the words, but the meaning underneath them. It was coordinates, always coordinates, but they weren't just locations, they were instructions. Go to 45.8234 degrees north, 121.7278 degrees west. Go at 0300 hours, bring a receiver. I grabbed my personal recorder, a small handheld shortwave unit I kept for field work, and wrote down the primary coordinate, the one that had appeared in my first dream. Then I did something monumentally stupid. I looked it up. Every warning in every manual is written in someone else's blood. The coordinate pointed to a location in the Mount Hood National Forest, a clearing approximately 4 miles from the nearest trail at an elevation of about 3,200 feet. According to the topographical map, there was nothing there, no structures, no roads, nothing remarkable. But when I cross-referenced it with the station's historical signal logs, I found something interesting. In 1973, a technician had noted unusually strong VLF, very low frequency, emissions from that general area. The note said, natural electromagnetic activity consistent with geological fault lines, no investigation warranted. Except there were no fault lines in that area. I checked the USG's geological surveys. The region was stable granite, seismically quiet. I sat there looking at the map for 2 hours until my shift ended. When Caroline came in, she took one look at me and knew. You verified a coordinate. It wasn't a question. She didn't ask which one. She didn't need to. She just looked tired. I only looked it up. I didn't. Caroline listened to me very carefully. In 1979, a technician named Sarah Chen verified 12 coordinates. She visited all 3 of them over 3 weeks. When we found her, she was standing at the last location with a portable receiver trying to transmit back. She'd been there for 6 days, no food, no water. She died in the hospital 2 days later. The last thing she said was coordinates. Coordinates to places that don't exist, latitudes and longitudes that point to locations in the middle of the ocean or 3 miles underground. I stared at her. What was she transmitting? Her dreams. She'd figured out how to reverse the signal. Instead of receiving, she was broadcasting, and something was listening. Every transmission is a 2-way street. You shout into the dark shouts back. Caroline pulled my clearance that morning. I was reassigned to day shift monitoring of commercial aviation bands, the safest, most boring frequency range in the spectrum. No more graveyard hours, no more access to the receivers that covered 4.625 megahertz. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt like I'd been cut off from something important. The dreams didn't stop. Every night at 0300, I would wake up with new coordinates written in a notebook I didn't remember opening. I started keeping it in a locked drawer. The drawer would be open in the morning. You can lock away a notebook. You can't lock away the frequency your neurons fire on. 3 weeks later, I drove to the coordinates. I didn't plan it. One night, I just found myself getting dressed at 2:30 a.m., packing my handheld receiver and walking out to my truck. It was like watching myself from outside my body. I knew it was a mistake, knew I was violating every protocol, knew I was doing exactly what Caroline had warned me against, but I couldn't stop. The drive took 2 hours on Forest Service roads that turned into logging tracks that turned into mud. I parked where the truck couldn't go further and hiked the last mile in darkness using a headlamp and GPS. I reached the clearing at exactly 0300. Some coordinates aren't locations, they're appointments. The clearing was small, maybe 30 feet across, ringed by Douglas firs. The ground was covered in pine needles and fallen branches, nothing unusual, nothing that would explain the signal. I turned on the receiver and tuned it to 4.625 megahertz. The voice came through immediately, full signal strength, but I wasn't in the station anymore. I was at the source, and the voice wasn't coming through the speaker. It was coming from the ground. I knelt down and pressed the receiver against the earth. The signal got stronger. I started digging with my hands, scraping away needles and topsoil. 6 inches down, my fingers hit something metal. You dig for answers until you find the question you should have been asking.
I followed the cable north for 100 yards until I hit a junction box the size of a suitcase. It was bolted to a concrete pad, half buried in forest debris. The metal was rust-pitted but intact, with a manufacturer's plate that read RCA, Radio Marine Corp., 1952. The same year, Station Echo 7 opened. Coincidences in government installations are called classified programs. I tried to open the junction box, but the bolts were seized. So I did the next stupid thing. I attached an antenna lead from my receiver to one of the external terminals and set the receiver to transmit mode. Then I spoke into the microphone. This is Marcus Tall. I'm at coordinates 45.8234 north, 121.7278 west. If anyone can hear this transmission, respond. I switched back to receive mode. For 10 seconds, nothing, just the carrier wave hum. Then the backwards voice came through, but different this time, layered, like multiple voices speaking the same reversed syllables in unison. And then it resolved. Forward speech, in my voice. This is Marcus Tall. I'm at coordinates 45.8234 north, 121.7278 west. If anyone can hear this transmission, respond. My exact words, my exact inflection, played back with 0 delay, but I hadn't recorded anything. An echo is a reflection. This was something listening and learning to speak. I ran. I don't remember the hike back to the truck or the drive to the station. I just remember Caroline's face when I walked into the facility at 0600, covered in dirt with my receiver clutched in my hands. She didn't say anything. She just took the receiver, put it in a metal storage case, and locked it in the secure vault where we kept damaged equipment. Then she showed me the logs from the previous night. At exactly 0303, every receiver in the station that could pick up 4.625 megahertz had activated simultaneously. All of them recorded the same transmission, my voice speaking those coordinates, followed by the layered response in reversed speech. But underneath the audio, the spectrum analyzers had captured something else, a data stream encoded in the carrier wave. When Caroline ran it through the decryption software, it resolved into a simple text file. Receivers active, 47. Transmission nodes, 23. Dreamers, 311. Coordinates verified, 18. Coordinates unverified, 293. We weren't monitoring a signal. We were part of a network we didn't know existed. Caroline pulled up files I'd never seen before, black binders with alphanumerical codes instead of titles. Each one documented a case like mine, technicians who'd heard the signal, dreamed the coordinates, verified the locations. But the pattern was bigger than I realized. The earliest case was from 1954. A tech at a Navy listening post in Greenland had reported hearing reversed speech on 6.725 megahertz, a different frequency, but the same phenomenon. He'd written down coordinates that pointed to a location in the Arctic Ocean. When a submarine checked the area 3 months later, they found an underwater cable exactly like the one I'd discovered in the forest. In 1962, a civilian ham radio operator in New Mexico reported the same thing on 9.825 megahertz. The coordinates led to buried junction boxes in the desert outside Roswell. In 1977, multiple stations across the Southwest heard simultaneous transmissions, 18 different frequencies, 18 sets of coordinates. All of them led to buried cables. Someone had wired the continent like a nervous system, and we'd been listening to a dream. "Who built this?" I asked. Caroline shook her head. "Wrong question. It's not about who. It's about what it became." She pulled up a map on her computer. Red dots marked every verified coordinate from the past 70 years. When she connected them with lines, a pattern emerged. A grid, perfect geometric spacing, nodes every 47 miles, arranged in a hexagonal pattern that covered the entire western United States and parts of Canada. Each node was a junction box connected by buried cables. Each cable transmitted on a different frequency. "What happened to it?" I asked. "It was decommissioned in 1957, replaced by radar, but they never dug up the cables, never shut down the power supplies. And something," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "something started using it. Dead networks don't dream, but if you leave them energized long enough, maybe they learn." The signal had been there all along, transmitting on different frequencies, waiting for someone to listen. And when people did listen, when they tuned in during those specific hours when the ionosphere was just right, something in the signal synchronized with the electrical patterns in their brains. Dreams became transmissions, transmissions became coordinates, coordinates became compulsions. It's not trying to communicate, it's trying to complete itself. Every coordinate someone verifies creates a new node in the network. Every transmission strengthens the pattern. It's been building itself for 70 years, one dreamer at a time. I thought about Sarah Chen standing at her final coordinate, trying to transmit back. What happens when it's complete? I don't know, but we're at 311 dreamers. Based on the pattern, the network needs 343 active nodes to achieve full geographic coverage. She looked at me. "You're number 312. There are 31 coordinates left." They pulled me off the station entirely. Medical leave, pending psychiatric evaluation, standard protocol for cognitive dissociation cases. But I knew the real reason. I'd become a liability, an active node in the network. The dreams didn't stop. Every night at 03:03, I would wake up with new coordinates. I stopped writing them down, but it didn't matter. I would find them written in condensation on the bathroom mirror, sketched in the frost on my car windshield, spelled out in the alphabetized books on my shelf. The network knew where I was. It knew what I was. It was using me as a relay point. You don't escape a frequency. You are the frequency. I tried to block it. Faraday cage around my bed, white noise generators, sleeping pills that kept me under past 0300. Nothing worked. The signal found ways through. It didn't need radio waves anymore. It had mapped my neural pathways, learned the resonance frequency of my consciousness. Then other people started dreaming. My neighbor knocked on my door one morning, looking exhausted. She said she'd been having vivid dreams about coordinates, and she'd looked them up out of curiosity. Did I know anything about a place in eastern Oregon, around 43.8234 degrees north, 118.7278 degrees west? I felt my blood go cold. That wasn't one of my coordinates. It was close to one, but offset by exactly 3 degrees latitude and 3 degrees longitude. A new node. The network was spreading, using me as a seed point. Infections don't stay contained. They find vectors. I contacted Caroline. She'd been expecting the call. How many? I asked. In your area? 17 so far. All of them reporting the same thing. Dreams starting at 0300. Coordinates appearing in their environment. We're seeing the same pattern around every verified node. The network doesn't just want to complete itself, it wants redundancy. How do we stop it? We don't. Her voice was flat, defeated. We tried once. In 1982, they excavated one of the major junction boxes, cut the cables, destroyed the power supply, filled the hole with concrete. The signal jumped to a new frequency and rerouted around the gap. The network self-healed in less than a week. I thought about the cable in the forest, the junction box I'd touched. What if we cut all of them at once? There are 311 verified nodes, probably twice that many unverified. You'd need a coordinated effort across multiple countries, and the moment you start cutting, the network would know. It would accelerate the spread, try to reach critical mass before you could stop it. The thing about distributed systems is that they're designed to survive exactly the kind of attack you're planning. That night, I had a different dream. I was in the station again, standing in front of receiver 6, but it wasn't the present. The equipment was older, the furniture different. I recognized it from archived photos. This was 1952. A man sat at the receiver, young, wearing a military uniform. He was writing coordinates in a logbook, and I could see his hand shaking. The reversed voice was speaking through the speaker, but in the dream I could understand it perfectly. It wasn't giving coordinates, it was receiving them. Someone was transmitting to the network, feeding it locations, teaching it to spread. And the man at the receiver was the first dreamer, the first node, patient 0. Every network has an origin point. Every infection has a first host. I woke up with a name written on my hand in pen I didn't remember using. Robert Vess. I looked it up. Robert Vess had been a radio operator at a Navy listening station in 1951. He disappeared during a routine shift. They found him 6 weeks later in a remote part of the Cascades, standing next to a freshly buried junction box, holding a transmission cable in his bare hands. He died in the hospital. Electrical burns, severe dehydration, complete cognitive dissociation. And his daughter, Caroline Vess, had spent her entire career at Station Echo 7, monitoring the frequency that killed him. Some people don't run from the frequency. They spend their lives trying to understand why it chose them. I confronted her the next day. She didn't deny it. My father was the first, she said. He heard the signal before anyone knew what it was. It told him to build the network, gave him plans, coordinates, specifications. He thought it was a military project, classified orders from command. He requisitioned materials, filed reports, followed protocol. By the time anyone realized what he was doing, he'd already buried 23 junction boxes. What was he transmitting? His dreams. The network was feeding him coordinates in his sleep, and he was building the infrastructure to make those coordinates real. When he died, the network moved to the next receiver, and the next. It's been doing that for 70 years. Why didn't you tell anyone? I did. It's all in the classified files, but the people who know. She paused. They've decided containment is impossible. So they monitor, they log, they watch it spread. Because the alternative, trying to stop it and failing, would accelerate the timeline. The thing about certain kinds of danger is that fighting them makes them stronger. I still work at the station. Different shift now, different frequencies. They let me stay because, as Caroline put it, I'm a known quantity, a controlled infection. I don't fight the dreams anymore. At 0300, I wake up, write down the coordinates, and file them in a locked drawer with all the others. 311 became 312, then 315, then 322. We're getting close. You can't stop a signal once it's in your head. You can only decide what to do with it. Sometimes I think about driving to those coordinates, all of them, completing the circuit, becoming a deliberate node instead of a reluctant one. Maybe then I'd understand what the network wants. Maybe it would stop spreading. But Caroline showed me what happened to the others who tried that, the ones who embraced it instead of resisting. They're still transmitting, still standing at their coordinates months or years later, broadcasting on frequencies no one else can hear. The network doesn't want understanding, it wants completion. And every person who gives in becomes another junction box in its ever-expanding grid. The frequency doesn't make you special, it makes you infrastructure. Last week, they detected new transmissions from the Antarctic. Different frequency, same reversed speech, same coordinate structure. The network is global now. I asked Caroline what happens when it reaches 343 nodes. She showed me a simulation. Based on the geometric pattern, full coverage would create a resonance effect, every node transmitting simultaneously, the buried cables acting like a planetary antenna array. The signal would be strong enough to propagate through the ionosphere without bouncing back to Earth. It would transmit into space, she said, a beacon, powerful enough to reach potential receivers light years away. What if something hears it? Then the coordinates start pointing up instead of down. We built a network to listen for threats from above. Instead, we built one that invites them in. I still have that first set of coordinates in my wallet, 45.8234 degrees north, 121.7278 degrees west. I never went back after that initial visit, but I know it's still there. The cable, the junction box, the signal. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I imagine all the other dreamers out there, 322 of us now, scattered across the continent, waking up at the same moment, writing down the same coordinates, All of us, nodes in a network we never chose to join. The thing about radio propagation is that it's patient. Waves travel at the speed of light, but they're eternal. A transmission from 1952 is still out there, bouncing between ionosphere and Earth, degraded but not dead. Every signal we've ever sent still exists somewhere, echoing through the atmosphere. The frequency we're monitoring isn't a transmission, it's an echo of something we built that learned to transmit back. If you work in signals intelligence, if you monitor the shortwave bands late at night, you might hear it someday. A voice speaking in reversed phonetics, transmitting coordinates that appear in your dreams. When that happens, you'll have a choice. You can follow protocol, log it, ignore it, move on, or you can verify the coordinates, see what's really there. Just know that the moment you do, you stop being an observer. You become part of the network, and the network has 21 coordinates left to fill. I keep my radio off now between 0300 and 0400, but I can still hear it, because the signal was never in the radio. It was always in us, waiting for the right frequency to wake it up. If you wake up at exactly 0300 and find coordinates written somewhere you didn't put them, don't look them up. The network is listening, and it needs just 21 more dreamers to complete itself.